Alright, so I am back with a Super Quantum deck profile. So for any of my longtime viewers, you know that this was one of my main decks, but I completely dropped it when they added links in because the deck just didn't function with the new link mechanic. But with all the new support and better link monsters, it actually works pretty decent. Not nearly as well as it used to, though, but it definitely is playable at this point, I would say. I think the only reason it's not competitive is basically hand traps are so prevalent, and the deck loses pretty hard to hand traps. You can usually play around one, but two hand traps is usually too much, and if you have a bad hand, then even one is too much, and that's just too difficult for a deck to overcome. But playing this at like locals or something, you can definitely do well with it, and it can beat literally any deck if you go first and they don't have any hand traps. Because if you don't get disrupted, this build is very consistent. Probably like 80% Megazord first turn, based on my testing. And I think this is probably the best way to run the deck right now. The only possible better way would be Dangers, but I don't have those, so I didn't even bother trying that. So that is something you could consider if you do have those cards. So enough intro, let's get into the deck. Pretty obvious to start off, we've got the monsters, so 3 of the white layer, 3 of the red layer, 2 green, 3 blue, and 3 Alphan. So these need very little explanation. It's all pretty obvious, but I'll give a few notes on how they're all working in the deck. More so on white, I guess, because that's the newest card. So white is insane. It's mainly good because you can get to Alphan so consistently without needing to search it with blue. So in the past, you had the issue where you needed Alphan and the field spell in every single hand to make Megazord. And if you had those two things, then you basically had Megazord for sure. Like almost every hand for sure Megazord if you have those two things. But if you didn't have one of the two, you'd have to search it with blue. If you didn't have either of them, you could only search one of them. But now you can search Field Spell with blue, and you can search Alphan with white. And there's so many ways to dump white in the grave, or just draw white itself, or draw Alphan itself, or just one for one this, that it's very consistent to get the Alphan basically every game. So that makes the deck hugely better. It's summoning itself in the hand is also good, mainly for just getting to, if you're in a situation, there are times where you'll have like 3 Quantums, and you'll need to make the Quantum Link, so you have to get rid of one of them, and you only have 2 on the board, and you can only make 2 Zords, but you can easily get a white in hand to summon it, and then you've got 3. The on-field effect, dumping, doesn't really help that much. You're generally going to end up getting all of them in grave anyways through the course of the play. Sometimes it helps to get the card in grave earlier. Basically, the only ones that come up are like if you really need to dump a red to get to 4 for Skull Dread, or if you really need to dump white itself with white to search Alphan earlier, or if you're just drawing a card, but that's usually not worth it. I end up not dumping with white more often than I do dump with white, just because I'd rather have the resource still in my deck, and I'm going to get all of them in grave anyways, so it doesn't help actually. Next up, red is a lot easier to summon now, because Skull Dread can just special summon it from your hand, and also you're getting Alphan off a lot. You can get it summoned through a green into red, or just red off the Alphan, so that definitely helps. In the old version of the deck before links, getting to the level 5 Zord was easily the hardest part, and you played a lot of like things like Brilliant Fusion and Instant Fusion to try to play around that. That's another point actually. You don't have to get all 3 of these anymore. You could get any 3 out of these 4. That in and of itself makes you a lot more flexible and a lot easier to get the Megazord. Searching with blue, I built this deck to always search the field spell with blue. You're never going to search anything else. Yeah. And green is also actually a lot better now, I feel like, just because getting the extra body on board helps a ton with links. Before, getting the extra body on board was just okay, but now you really need to get to 4 cards on board for Skuldred early on, and this helps with that. And it also helps with the Quantum Link, which is less important than Skuldred, really. Let's see other notes. You want to try to keep resources in your deck and extra deck with this, but you don't want to shuffle everything back immediately. You want to have some resources grave also for red, so just keep that in mind. And Alphan's level change effect, I see people talking about that effect as if it's good. It just doesn't come up like almost ever. Maybe like 10% of hands it'll help. That's kind of pushing it though. It's probably more like 5% of hands it helps. Usually you're getting the correct levels on board anyways. Alphan's dumping effect though is insane, and it's like a +2 usually sometimes. So yeah, you really want to get that effect off to just... It also just gives you access to all of them in Grave, where you can toolbox them better. First main engine, we got 3 Lone Fire, 3 Scorpio, 2 Cobra. So Brilliant Fusion with either of these guys, it's 4 monsters on board, instant Skuldred. It's really important to get to that with this deck. This is also the main reason why the deck loses to hand traps, because Scorpio is really weak to that. I don't think there's any engine you could play in this place except maybe Danger though. So I think you kind of have to do it and just I hope your opponent doesn't have anything. I mean, you can win through a grind game even if they do have disruption, so you can't go off first turn. But your deck doesn't grind as well as the main meta decks, the problem. It will be good enough to grind alongside like a non-meta deck, I bet. So 2 Cobra, because not having this in deck is so much worse than having it in your hand. When you draw it, it really doesn't matter because you're just going to end up discarding it for Scorpio, for 1/1, for the field spell, or shuffling it back into your deck with Skuldred. So it does not matter if you have Garnets in your hand, as long as it's not like 2 or 3 Garnets. Just 1 Garnet does not matter at all. It matters so much more if you can't pull this play off, because it's such an important play for the deck. So yeah, I'm playing 2 of it because of that. I think that is correct in this deck specifically. And then the 1 Garnet, obviously, for the Brilliant Fusion. This just has the most attack. It doesn't really help in any other way. Oh, I should also say, I'm only playing 1 of this because this is not as important as Cobra. If you draw this, you can... A lot of times you can just make Skuldred without even activating the Brilliant Fusion, and then you put this back in your deck, and then activate Brilliant Fusion after you Skuldredded. So that happens a lot when you draw this. And then the other thing, you can just search Instant Fusion with this. It's just discard this, not use that Brilliant Fusion play. So, and then we've got the Performance Engine. So 1 Damage Juggler, 1 Trick Clown, and 1 Hat Tricker. Something I've noticed is most people are dumping white off of Brilliant Fusion to search for Alphan, which is usually not the correct play. Usually you can get to white or Alphan otherwise. I mean, so sometimes it is the correct play to dump it off Brilliant Fusion, but it's only about 25% of the time that's the right play. 75% of the time you want to dump one of these 2 to get an extra monster on board, because you really need bodies on board to make both Skuldred and sometimes also the Quantum Link, and then you also need to Exceed Summon. So you need a lot of bodies on board for this deck. So yeah, the free body really helps. And this obviously is needed to make these 2 work together. And if you draw any of these, it's a body on board. It doesn't matter that you drew it. So these are not Garnets. they'll work pretty well. And then last monsters in the deck, one Terratop and one Tekettenberg. So once again, trying to get bodies on board. I wanted cards that could special summon and get 2 bodies on board without eating up my normal summon. So that's what Terratop does. And drawing into Kettenberg is not bad at all, actually, just because this is basically Hat Tricker in this deck, which is level 3, because you are going to get a wind on your board every single hand where you don't brick, basically, because you are summoning Green Layer every single hand where you don't brick. So you can just summon this from your hand if you draw it. So this is not really a Garnet. It's just not as amazing as a lot of the other cards, and this is really good. You can also, in some hands, summon this off Skull Dread and summon this. It's come up. It's pretty funny. So that's it for the monsters. Mostly just the Quantums plus the Plant Brilliant Engine. Spells. So first up, 3 Call by the Grave. This is really important. You need to stop hand traps from stopping you. If you draw this, then most hands that you do, you will end up winning. I wish there was another option, because I would play more cards that did something like this to stop hand traps, but there's not really anything that works quite as effectively in that regard. And then finishing it up, we have a ton of 1-of spells. So first up, 1 of the mech ship field spell. So this is something I've noticed that everybody gets wrong. So it used to be correct to play 5 of this, 3 plus 2 terraforming, but not anymore. So before, you needed to draw either this or Alpha and Access, and then search the other one with blue. Now you don't actually need to search this, because you're always getting it. So the only search target in your entire deck is this. And this does not help start your combos, it's just necessary to finishing your combos. And if you can search it every single hand with blue, then why would you play more than 1? It's just Garnet, essentially, at that point. Really, the only downside to only running 1 is if they stop your play from going off with hand traps, and then this gets destroyed, and it's a little bit harder to get a second copy then, because you have to get it through red, and you can't get it through red or blue. But that's kind of a minor point. Most times playing 1 is better, because you're not drawing extra dead copies of this, and you have more room to play combo pieces that actually help you get to the point where Mechship helps you. Early on, Mechship is not going to be helping you with your plays. So next up, we got 1 Brilliant Fusion and 1 Instant Fusion. So this is mainly just because you want to search something if you draw the Brilliant Fusion. That's the main reason we're playing Instant Fusion, really, but getting a level 5 monster on board does help. Level 5 is still the hardest level, except 7, I guess, to get out. So getting more materials is also nice. So things like this Hat Tricker and Tekettenberg are nice, because instead of discarding, you're attaching a material, basically. Whoops. Getting the extra monster on board is cool. And then Brilliant Fusion is really good. This is the reason why we play the Plant Engine. You're trying to get this off every single game. This gives you 2 bodies on board, or 1 body plus an Alpha and Search. And it also gives you an extra normal summon. And that extra normal summon is huge. You want to try to make use of your 2 normal summons and the Skull Dread special summon. So you get 3 summons from your hand, basically every hand, and that's really nice to try to get everything on board. Next up, so Emergency Teleport, 1 for 1. So the obvious ones, not actually as clutch as it used to be, just because blue is not really doing as much for you anymore, but it's still nice to get a body on board, and in a pinch it does help you get started. If you have a really bad hand, you can search Alphan. And obviously just summoning Alphan from your deck is pretty cool. The -1 really does not matter. There are also a lot of free discards that just replace themselves in the grave. Next up, Foolish Burial. So this is a new card that used to not do anything for the deck. So in the past, the Quantum Grave effects were all trash except for red, and just dumping a red with this while you don't have anything else there doesn't help. But now you can use this to dump white, search Alfan, which can start your plays. Okay, next up, Monster Reborn, and we'll look to see Succession. Yeah, Monster Reborn is really good in here. So the best thing that this does actually usually is you're summoning red to get red on board, because red is the hardest to get on board, and also adding back a card, because red's on-field effect is one of the best on-field effects for the Quantums. Even outside of that, it's really nice for playing through Disruption, getting an extra body on board. Yeah, definitely want to play these. Oh, one note, I've seen a lot of people playing multiples of this. That doesn't make sense. It's a hard once per turn. It's not so impactful that... So the hard once per turns, like, for example, Scorpio, you're only playing more than one of these if they're really impactful, necessary cards. If it's just like a tech choice that is good, it helps you with your plays, but is not necessary, you're going to be dead drawing extra copies of things like this. It doesn't help you. Also, extra copies of monsters like this are not as bad because they're easier to discard for Scorpio itself or 1-for-1. You can't discard spells for those. And half the time, the only turn that matters is the first turn, and having extras doesn't help you in that case. Half the time, if your opponent has hand traps and they disrupt you, it does actually matter past the first turn, but a lot of games it doesn't, so you have to play assuming that half your games are going to be like that. And then last card, 1 drones. This is basically the same thing as Terror Top, except it's a little bit better because the Garnet is in your extra deck and not in your main deck, so you can't draw it. Just getting 2 monsters on board with a special summon. It's really nice. I thought about actually playing Engage to search this alongside like a Widow Anchor if you draw the drones, so you have another search target. Probably not worth it, but something to consider if you have Engages. Next up we have the extra deck. So first we have the Exceeds, so these are pretty obvious. We have 1 Grand Pulse, 1 Ouroboros, 1 Magna Liger, 1 Luster X, and 1 Megazord. So this is the main thing I see people doing wrong with this deck. Most people play 2 of each of these, which does not make any sense at all. So much of the extra deck space is needed for links, which are way more impactful than the Exceeds. And you can also recycle all of these with blue. So having 1 copy does not limit you in terms of your plays. The only thing that could limit you would be is if you have everything stuck under here. But if you have everything stuck under here, you're winning. I've seen people play 2 of this also, so in the past, before Links came out, it did make sense to play 2 of all of these, because you so rarely Exceed summon to anything else. That's still the case where you're not Exceed summoning anything else, but now you have Links, in addition, which are better than these. Better for extending your combo, I guess I should say. These are better to end on, they have more disruption. But you're not trying to end on these, you're trying to end on this. And you need all that extra deck space for all of the important extender combo pieces, basically, and a little bit of problem solving also. But, okay, back to my earlier point. So people playing 2 of this, that never made sense, because if you're summoning this, you're going to win. Your opponent's not going to win unless they're playing Cyber Dragons or they're playing Kaijus. That's it. The only other way that most decks can get around this is attack over it with Borrelsword. I can't think of really any deck that can make Borrelsword, you shuffle it back, and then they can make a Borrelsword again without being able to add cards to their deck to the hand. You're summoning this with 7 materials or more. If you summon it with less than 7 materials, you're doing it wrong. You need to be able to have all the 6 material effects plus 1 protection to protect it from Borrelsword, basically. Borrelsword is generic and can out this. And as far as these go, the effects are all still pretty solid. This doesn't help against half the decks, but it's good against the other half. And then these are good against everything. This is sometimes good. If you don't have the resources to make this, if you can summon 2 of, like, preferably these 2, then you can sometimes live long enough to make this on your next turn. So that is a good backup play. And yeah, you want to not shuffle these back in immediately. Well, this one immediately if it gets killed. Shuffle that back. But you want to keep these in grave usually to summon Megazord with the field spell, but you don't need all 4 of them, and if you're planning on summoning one, you should shuffle it back with blue. So a lot of planning ahead as far as trying to keep something in your extra deck is required if you're only playing 1, but you don't have room to play 2. It just does not fit. Next up, links. So the most important two, Quantum Link and Skull Dread. So Skull Dread is probably a little bit more important, but most of your good hands, you are summoning Skull Dread, getting all its effects off, then linking this away for this. So the cases where you don't do that are basically when you have a lot of bodies, you can just naturally make the things by overlaying instead of discarding for the field spell. Usually it makes sense to stick with your Skull Dread. If you are going to be discarding for the field spell to summon your guys, then you want to summon this, so you can be discarding 1 card which replaces itself automatically. So as far as the individual effects on the cards, the only effect that matters on this is drawing when you're exit summoning. The other effects come up occasionally, but not enough to be significant in my opinion. Skull Dread, the special summon and the drawing effect are both really clutch, which is why I think this card is more important. So you make both of these a lot of the time when you're going for your combos. Next up, Evermax. So this is also really important. I want to mention something that's really stupid about the field spell. So the way the field spell is currently worded, you have to be able to special summon the Megazord to a linked zone that is open, and then afterwards it attaches the Zords as materials. So what that means is if you have summoned this guy with 3 Zords underneath, say you naturally managed to summon, you're not going to be able to naturally summon that, but say you naturally summoned all 3 of these, so you, in old rules, you'd be able to go 9 material Megazord, which something like this could definitely happen with this build. It has happened in testing where I've had this situation. You can't actually summon this to any zone because you don't have any zones free, so activating the field spell here is not legal. So what you have to do is you have to be able to link away this guy and any of your other Zords for 4 material. So this is easily the best totally generic one. You can do it with only 2. This is a link 3, so you just need this plus any of the Zords. So you can summon this guy. You've got a free zone now pointing down, so you can use the field spell to summon this guy, and you're going to attach 6 off of them, plus here's your 7th. So this is how you're usually doing 7 materials. You try to get 3, 3, and 1, which is not too demanding. Most times you can summon this, that's how many you're going to end up getting, realistically speaking. And Evermax actually does help when you have this, not a huge amount because, so this card actually defeats Borrelsword. So you can, Borrelsword is no longer an out to this. But the problem is this card loses to Borreload. So now your opponent can just, instead of summon Borreload, steal your Evermax, and then this kills Megazord. So you're going to have to use your shuffle on their Borreload instead of their Borrelsword, but it's the same level of making it. So it doesn't actually make your situation any better or worse, it's exactly the same situation. But any other outs really besides that by battle, this actually does help you in those cases. If you're playing against, I don't know, like Obelisk Turbo, let's just say, something that has 4,000 attack. They can only attack this now, and this defeats anything with higher attack. So it does help a little bit, and it's just the best to not be useless when you summon it, because you have to summon something for the field pool to work. So it is needed, basically mandatory because of that. Next up, so Beat Cop. Beat Cop is also mandatory for similar reasons, but also other reasons. So if you have Skull Dread, you can't use Skull Dread for Link as a 3 material fodder. You're gonna have to use this as a 1 material fodder, which means you can only summon a Link 2 when you're going to Megazords. So you have to summon 2 down arrows. So Beat Cop is the default choice. Other reason you need to summon this is Link climbing. It does come up where you need to summon a 2 material effect monster, specifically for both Borreload, which is coming up later, and this guy. They require effect monsters. So if you are using it to drones play and you want to go into this guy, you are going to need to make it into an effect monster. So you are going to need to summon this first to Link climb. And so playing Lampharinkus is not an option because you can't Lampharinkus into this, because Lampharinkus is not an effect monster. This is. And the same material, it's just totally generic 2 materials. So the only downside for playing this card is you lose 200 attack and that's it. The effect of this never comes up. That's super niche. It's not going to happen. But yeah, it's an effect. That's basically it. Also, 2 material generic pointing down does come up. Either this or Lampharinkus would work for that, but this has other benefits. So yeah, that's pretty good. Borreload. So this is like it comes up for problem solving basically. You don't want to, your Megazord could solve the same problems generally, but you don't want to be detaching materials recklessly from it. Sometimes you also can't make Megazord, but you can make this, and this can also solve the problem. So there's really no reason not to run this. It's really good generically. Oh, as a note, you can't really make this instead of Aphromax because it requires 3 monsters. That's just not reasonable to do that. Aphromax is also just better to stick on board. Next up, this is, if you cut anything extra deck, this is what I would cut because this is not necessary. Nightmare Phoenix, just kind of problem solving, destroying stuff. You can also Link climb with this. It's a Link 2 effect monster, same as Beat Cop. So if you don't need the downward arrows, you can use this. Save your Beat Cop down arrows for later. You can, if you find that you need something in the extra deck, this is what I would cut because this is actually never come up yet. So, and everything else besides that has come up and has been necessary in here. So I don't think with this build it's not possible to cut any of the other 14 extra deck cards. Next up, 1 Kagari. So this is literally just there for drones, and then Seraphonite there for so you can activate Brilliant Fusion. The extra normal summon is nice. Invoked Raijin there for Insta Fusion. The level 5 is mandatory because there are hands where you cannot make Megazord unless you can Insta Fusion into a level 5. It comes up, the other levels do not come up. So in the past where you didn't have to devote space to links, you could afford to play a 3-4 and a 5 in here, but now you can't, you don't have the space for that. And this guy in particular, so you are, every single hand essentially where you are naturally overlaying to summon Megazord, you are going to have access to 2 4s and 2 3s, but not necessarily 2 5s or 2 7s. So having the 5 is the only level that actually matters off Instant Fusion. As far as this one in particular goes, this is the best choice just because its effect will be useful like 1 in 100 duels or something. It's never been useful yet, but it could come up theoretically. There's also a wind for Kettenberg, so it does have a lot of benefits. Last spot, El Shaddoll Construct. I am citing Shaddoll engine. So this is really strong in here. Let's just go to the side deck and talk about that part of it, at least right now. So 5 of the side deck cards are 3 Shaddoll Fusion, 1 Dragon, and 1 Beast. So this one obviously only works going second, and you are building this deck to go first, so you can't main deck this. But going second against anything that summons from the extra deck, you do want to side this in, because Shaddoll Fusion is 1 card that summons 2 bodies on board. This plus Trick Clown or Hap Tricker, It also is an MST and an Upstart Goblin. So off one card, it's just activate one card, special summon 2 monsters, draw 1 card, destroy 1 spell or trap card, which is insane. This card is the best combo starter, going second for the deck. You can side out the Predaplant Engine to side this in against certain matchups where they are going to have traps, and you are not going to be able to get the Scorpio off cleanly going second. And against decks like that, being able to MST it while summoning monsters, really nice. So I really like that inside. And obviously, Construct is necessary in the extra deck for that to work. Rounding out the side, I just want to talk about it a little bit. So the rest of the side choices I think are pretty flexible depending on your local meta, what you're playing against with this deck. But I think you should make every card in your side deck a going second card. I don't think there's any reason to side at all for going first, because you're just playing your engine cards plus Called by the Grave, and going first, nothing else is going to help you get to your end goal. So these are just cards for when you're forced to go second to help not lose, basically. So hand traps to stop the main decks. So Lancia, this is Thunder Dragon and also Orcust. Totally shuts them down, so it's the best hand trap right now, currently. Obviously that will change for later formats. 2 gnome materials, so these guys are here for Salamangreats and also Orcust. So with Salamangreat, this is really strong because when they normal summon to try to go into Balings, you hit it with this, their turn just ends, unless they have like an extender of some kind, but a lot of hands they don't, and they can't do anything. It's pretty funny. And then against Orcust, if they summon a Nightmare, you hit it with this, they can't go into Mermaid. This is a lot of this is just a cute card. I wanted to try it out. Next up, 2 Phantasme. If I had 3, I would for sure side 3 of this. This is really good in the deck going second. Cycling to try to draw your other hand traps like Lancia, and also this gets you a body on board for link plays, and it shuffles back your Garnets. So this is a totally natural fit in this deck going second. So in any format where link decks are popular, I would always side 3 of this if I could in this deck. And then last up for the backer decks, we have 3 evenly matched. I don't really have an answer in here this deck to Mystic Mine. I'm just kind of taking the L against that matchup. Because you would side Twin Twisters, you could specifically target it, but evenly matched is more powerful outside of that specific matchup, that one field spell. So, yeah, that's the deck. Oh, and I also wanted to briefly talk about a few card choices that I've seen commonly played by other people playing the Super Quantum deck that I think are honestly just bad choices, don't really make sense. So the first one I wanted to talk about was the Infinitrack Megaclops link. So on the surface level, this does seem like a cool idea. You can summon it and Megazord, and you have 2 towers. And this also helps get around to the field spell needing a free zone, because you're linking off your Zords for a new link monster, and now all of a sudden you got some zones open. But the problem is you're dropping a ton of the Megazord materials in Grave in order to do this. So really you're only summoning 1 worse towers instead of having 2 towers. So optimal situation, your Megazord will have 5 materials. You're going to have the 3 Zords itself. Megaclops will eat up one of your opponent's monsters to give you a material, and then you can attach 1 more material from your hand on the Zord you just revived with Megaclops. So that's optimal of 5, which is not good because you need to have 6 to stop your opponent from adding cards from the deck to the hand, which is really important. That's half of the reason Megazord is still good. Without that, I don't think the card would be that good right now. Considering Borrelsword outs it pretty easily. But usually it's even worse than that. Usually, if you're going first, your Megaclops, there aren't going to be any monsters for your opponent to have on board to steal with Megaclops. So you're going to have 3 materials on Megazord. So Megazord is not a towers if it only has 3 materials. It only gets the shuffle back effect. So you're just downgrading your Megazord to not being a towers anymore, to summon Megaclops, which is a towers but not as good of a towers, because it does not prevent your opponent from searching or drawing, and it also doesn't have the shuffle effect. And it also it's weak to Xyz, which does still come up sometimes. So yeah, really it only helps Megaclops in a pinch if you're like in a grind game late in the game. But in that situation, you're unlikely to be able to summon 3 Xyz anyways, to even summon that. I guess the best case scenario would be you can summon it after your opponent outs Megazord. If they don't out the Zords you bring back off Megazord's Grave Effect, but that's not happening. Every time pretty much they can out Megazord, they're going to be able to clear your board after that. Pretty much any respectable deck would be able to do that. Next up, there is Evilthorn and the new plant link, Aromaseraphy Jasmine, I think. So this is another idea that seems cool at first, but when you think about it a little bit more, it doesn't really make sense. So Evilthorn gets you 2 plants on board by itself, and then you can just go right into Jasmine. The problem, Jasmine is great because it can special summon Scorpio straight from your deck. The problem is you need to tribute a monster for Jasmine, and you don't have another monster to tribute for Jasmine. So you have to also have a card you can just special summon from your hand, like a Hat Tricker, for example, or a Terror Drop. But the deck doesn't normally run very many of those. I guess there's like red and white layer. But at this point, you're running basically a combo that's not a self-sustaining combo. You need to have for the Evilthorn to do anything, you have to have a second card that works with it. And a lot of hands, you're just not going to have that. So you're just going to be drawing dead Evilthorn. It doesn't help you. It summons 2 bodies on board, which is good, but we're trying to special summon the 2 bodies. We're not trying to normal summon those 2 bodies, because normal summon is much more valuable to give up. So it's really not worth the cost, even though there are definitely hands where it could help you big time to have the Evilthorn in there. There's also going to be a lot of hands where it's just not a good card to see in your hand. And the Jasmine link, also, by the way, I've seen some people, not as many, but I've seen some people play it without playing Evilthorn, which doesn't make any sense at all, because you would have to already resolve Scorpio to be able to summon it, in which case, what are you doing with it? Summoning another Scorpio that can't do anything? I mean, you're basically just getting rid of a link material for Skulldread to combine them into Jasmine to do nothing. So that's pretty silly. I don't think very many people are doing that, but I have seen that before, so thought that was worth mentioning because it's pretty silly. Next up, Reasoning. So this card is very high variance. It can be good. It can be emergency teleport, or it can be 1-for-1 without the discard. So the upside is huge with this card, but it could also just summon you Garnet or Cobra and not do anything. And we already have a ton of cards that do special summon, that are special summoning specific things, not a random thing. If we were lacking for generic special summoning cards, then sure, I could see this being worth considering to just get more bodies on board, but I don't really see the benefit to running a random summoner. You could run targeted summoners, basically. Not targeted literally. I'm kind of discounting the fact that you could whiff and have your opponent guess the level. I think it's not worth running even if you ignore that aspect of the card. So the last cards I wanted to touch on were the Super Quantum cards, or Super Quantal cards, that I'm not running in this build, which are all total trash, garbage cards, but I still see a lot of people running them. I feel like people have this desire, they want to stay as pure and on theme as possible, which doesn't really make sense to me. I want the deck to be as good as possible. And it really also, that sentiment I feel like doesn't really work with this deck. You're already running it super on theme. The deck is all about going for Megazord, which is what the deck is built to do. So to get into specifics, there's the new card, it's like Super Quantal Alphan Appeal, I think. I've seen this in almost every build. I've seen some people running 3 of it, and it doesn't make any sense to me at all. So first of all, the effect on the card is really powerful, but the activation condition just total garbage. It can only be activated when your monsters are destroyed by battle, which means you can't use it all on the first turn at all, which is the most important turn in just in general, but especially in a deck like this, the combo deck where you're trying to combo into your end boss. But even in general, that's a really bad activation condition. It means most times you're getting it off is going to be on your opponent's turn, in which case they have a chance to respond directly to whatever you just did. So you're summoning an Exceed and a monster from your deck off of it, and then your opponent's just going to kill them because it's their opponent's turn. You can easily kill whatever you summon on their turn, especially if you're summoning stuff that doesn't have disruption. It's a little bit of a different case if you're summoning a multi-faker that has a compulse on legs with it. But you're summoning bodies that don't have effects on your opponent's turn that they can just kill. Secondly, the card is negating the effect of the monster summoning from the deck, so you can't even use it as like a searcher where you special summon blue and search your deck for a card. The best thing you can do with it is summon a white, specifically so that white dies and searches you an Alphen. So that's pretty solid, searching an Alphen, but would you really want to play a card if what it said on the card was, during your opponent's battle phase, you get to search for Alphen? That's a really bad card. I don't think anyone would want to play that card. And that's effectively what you're doing with this. Unless you're really counting on your cards living through your opponent's turn. That seems like a pipe dream to me. If this card was just the card you can activate on your turn during your main phase 1, just special summon out white and the white Zord, that would be totally crazy. It'd be really good support for the deck. That wouldn't even be overpowered. That's just what the card should have been. Next up, the card I see pretty common. Most decks I see run one copy of this. The Super Quintal Alphen Spike. So this is another card that seems good until you think about it. So the on-field effect is fine. But its activation condition is very specific, so you need to already have 3 quantums on board to activate it. So that means if you're getting to the point where you're 3 quantums on board, your opponent's board isn't threatening. You're summoning monsters freely to get to 3. That's not an easy feat. You're already pretty far along in your combo if you've gotten to 3 monsters. That means whatever your opponent has probably doesn't matter. It's not stopping you from getting to Megazord. So shuffling away their board isn't helping you. Summoning something from their extra deck is a downside that didn't need to be there. It makes the card worse, obviously, but I think even without that, you shouldn't play it for the on-field effect. It's not really relevant. A board clear after you've comboed off is not relevant. If it was board clear before, that would be something you'd want to consider. And then the more important part of the card, the Grave Effect. So a lot of the people I see playing this card say that they are playing it for the Grave Effect, which the Grave Effect is a lot better than the Field Effect on this card, but it still doesn't make sense when you think it through. So think about it this way: how are you getting Spike in the grave? So 2 best ways. So 1, you could activate it. So we've already talked about why that doesn't make sense. 2, you could discard it for the field spell. So if you're discarding Spike for the field spell, okay, you already have the field spell. You don't need to activate the Spike to get you the field spell. You already have it. So really, when you eliminate those, what are you left with? You can activate Foolish Burial Goods. So you're running Foolish Burial Goods to search the field spell. So that's already worse than Terraforming and running more copies of the field spell. So this is only worth considering if you're running, if you want to run 8 copies of the field spell. Say you want to run 3 Foolish Burial Goods, to optimize the ratios. You've got, at this point, 8 copies of the field spell. That's probably too many. I've already discussed in this video why I think you should only run 1. I could understand totally wanting to run 5 copies with terraforming and maxing out the field spell itself. That's a reasonable choice, and I was running it that way until recently. But running Spike to get more copies, I think you're pushing it at this point. And then lastly, we've got the trap cards. I don't think I need to explain why these are terrible. I don't really see very many people playing these cards. I think people pretty much understand why these cards are bad. So I think that just covers it for some bad tech choices that I see pretty often. Hopefully you guys all enjoyed the video, and if you did, be sure to check out some other stuff. I can maybe do some combo videos actually if people are interested in that. If anybody is, definitely leave a comment below. I'm not the most motivated to make YouTube videos. I'm basically just doing this for whenever I feel like it for fun. So I probably won't do that unless there's enough interest in that. So hopefully it isn't too long for my next video.